Before we understand on how the novel coronavirus multiplies, it is important to understand how do viruses work. Scientists believe that viruses are on the borderline, the fringe cases between the living and the non-living. Unlike all living species, viruses cannot replicate themselves. They need a host cell. So what a virus does is that it gets into a live cell, which could be a human being, an animal, even a bacteria, and use that live cell to distort the live cell from within and then destroy it, and in that process of destruction, new copies of that same virus comes out. All viruses belong to a certain segment of the human body. So they are able to manipulate and modify only those kind of cells to create copies of themselves. The novel coronavirus belongs to a class of viruses which affect the respiratory tract of a human being, which means from the nose, mouth, onwards to the lungs. It can only thrive in that area of the body, and that is why, as you have heard, the novel coronavirus spreads through respiratory droplets because it only lives in this portion of your body. It cannot spread through sweat, it cannot spread through any other discharge other than discharge from your respiratory tract. The novel coronavirus has mastered the art now of entering into the respiratory tract, going deep into it, and then destroying cells out there to create copies of itself. The novel coronavirus is believed to exist in 4 stages. Stage 1 is a subclinical stage. Patients who just go through a subclinical stage barely exhibit any symptom of sneezing or coughing or even fever. These people almost live like normal humans, and they seem very healthy, maybe a mild cough or something, but they remain to be infected. Of course, after 2 weeks of the novel coronavirus cycle, they heal on themselves. But the number of people who go through this kind of an infection is relatively low. The second stage of the novel coronavirus is the stage of mild symptoms. People who enter this stage exhibit an infection in the upper respiratory tract. In that stage of infection, a person usually may exhibit mild cough, mild sneezing, mild fever. It's actually a case of a mild viral fever. It exhibits the same symptoms. A very few people again go through this stage. Most of the people get the third kind of novel coronavirus symptoms, which is when the virus has infected deeper into the respiratory tract, the lower part of your respiratory tract. At that stage, the virus is eating at the inner lining of the respiratory tract near the lungs. That is the stage when the virus exhibits itself into medium to severe coughing, sneezing, nasal discharge, and medium fever. And these are symptoms just similar to a normal viral fever, slightly worse than a normal viral fever. But again, it's a completely non-lethal zone, and nobody is known to have died at that stage. The fourth stage is where 6% of patients of novel coronavirus enter. Most of these 6% are old people or people with pre-existing conditions. This stage is called the pneumonia stage. At the pneumonia stage, the novel coronavirus has not only gone deep into the respiratory tract, but it has been eating into the respiratory lining and has developed severe complications. Understanding these complications and this stage is critical because 6% people enter this stage who are infected by the novel coronavirus, but out of those 6%, nearly half, in fact more than half, are dying. Once a person enters into the pneumonia stage of the novel corona infection, the treatment is relatively limited. As of now, we have no medicine which can kill the novel coronavirus, as you all know. We also do not have a vaccine which can prevent the novel coronavirus from entering the human body or assuming a pneumonia-like form. The only possible treatment which patients are getting right now is through an equipment called the ventilator. The ventilator essentially takes over the functions of the lungs, supports the lungs in doing their operation, and thereby the weakened lung, which is in a pneumonia stage, which is clogged with inflamed cells and body's own immunity cells, is able to function relatively normally, though not completely normally, and thereby the load on the lung is reduced. When the load on the lung is reduced, the load on the heart is also reduced, because if the lung function goes down, the heart has to compensate for it by pumping extra blood in the organs of the body. And that is why people with cardiac problems are also prone to novel coronavirus casualties, because when the lung function dies, the heart is overloaded, and the heart cannot be overloaded beyond a limit, and cardiac arrest can happen. But by using a ventilator, we keep the lung function in check, and thereby the heart is also kept in check, and hence the patient is more likely to survive through the pneumonia stage. Do remember that the novel coronavirus will eventually die its natural death, and also that the body will heal itself, and it's only for a short duration of time that you need to put a person on a ventilator. Pneumonia is not uncommon, but the novel coronavirus pneumonia has a special trait which makes it harder to treat. The regular antibiotics which are used to treat pneumonia in normal patients does not work on novel coronavirus induced pneumonia. Do remember, it's a virus caused pneumonia, and a virus which we don't know of. So our normal antibiotics are ineffective in such a pneumonia, and that's why it's difficult to treat it. And it takes only time. You have to give the patient time on a ventilator to make this person survive. And that's why governments from all around the world are rushing to keep a track of their ventilators, and the difference between life and death and the mortality rate of a country versus another is based on how many ventilators it has in its hospitals. The regular belief is that people who are young, people who are in 30s, 20s, 40s are less prone or almost zero prone to mortality through novel coronavirus. While it is true that no child has been killed by the novel coronavirus so far, it is not an absolute fact. You see, the novel coronavirus lives and thrives in the internal linings of the respiratory tubes. It has a specific liking for a particular kind of protein on which it thrives. Now, in most of us, most normal people, this protein is in a limited amount. But for some people, genetically, so it's got to do with genetics, some people genetically create more of this protein in their respiratory tubes, which means in these patients, even at a lesser age, the novel coronavirus can rapidly multiply and create complicated infections. This is also the case of the 34-year-old doctor who died out of novel coronavirus in Wuhan. This was a doctor who came out with the whistleblower of the novel coronavirus, who told the world that the novel coronavirus is spreading. And that person was 34 years old, and the reason why he perished to the virus is because he probably genetically had more of that protein in his respiratory lining, which meant that the virus, even despite the fact that he was in mid-30s, was able to infect him at a level when it reached the pneumonia stage. So that is why, while no more than 1 in 1,000 or even 1 in 10,000 people have this genetic issue of protein, extra protein in their respiratory lining, we do not know who has it and who does not. So even if a young person starts showing heavy breathing, difficulty in breathing out of novel coronavirus, or shows signs of pneumonia, it's important to treat this case seriously, because this may be a case of those genetic people who are more prone to novel coronavirus. And this case should not